The janitor who knew the code for 5 years, Luther Grant pushed his mop through the endless glass corridors of Calderon Automotive Systems, his footsteps silent on the waxed marble, his presence barely more than a shadow trailing behind the janitor cart. No one noticed him. They rarely did. Executives in power suits brushed past without so much as a glance. Engineers huddled over prototypes and schematics never paused to nod hello. The only acknowledgement he received was from the janitorial time clock he punched at 11:02 p.m. and again at 6:14 a.m. Luther didn't mind. In fact, he preferred it. Invisibility had its perks. While the others went home to rest, Luther wandered the hushed offices alone, his mop gliding past confidential design blueprints, half-drunk coffee mugs labeled with names like Chase and Langston, and locked doors with coded keypads that whispered more secrets than they guarded. He never touched anything. He only listened, and he remembered. Every blueprint, every number, every keypad tone. His mind, often dismissed as nothing more than a tool to guide a mop, was a vault. What no one at Calderon knew was that Luther Grant once held a degree in computational engineering from MIT. Life had derailed him. A false accusation. A wrongful conviction. 5 years in prison for a white-collar crime he didn't commit had exiled him from the white-collar world. When he got out, his past followed him like a curse. No company would hire him for what he was trained to do. But mopping floors? That required no resume. Just silence.so he cleaned. Until one night changed everything. It was 2:41 a.m. on a Tuesday when Luther wheeled his cart through the executive corridor. The lights flickered, motion sensors only half responsive after the weekend maintenance glitch. At the end of the hallway stood the conference room with floor-to-ceiling glass. Inside, a man sat hunched over a laptop, eyes darting across the screen, hands moving rapidly across the keys. It was Vincent Taro, Chief Technology Officer. Luther slowed. Vincent never stayed this late. And never alone. Through the glass, Luther could see lines of code streaming across the monitor. It wasn't the usual software debug. This was different. He recognized kernel-level commands, deep system protocols, encryption routines. Luther's breath caught. That wasn't Calderon code. It looked like sabotage. His mind raced. He memorized the screen, line by line, symbol by symbol. Then he wheeled the cart forward like nothing happened. The next morning, he went to work as usual. But everything felt different. The executive floor buzzed louder than usual. People whispered behind closed doors. A memo flashed across his cleaning schedule. Security protocol, external breach suspected. Non-essential systems under audit. They thought the company had been hacked. They didn't realize the mole was inside the building. Luther knew he couldn't stay silent. Not this time. But going to HR would get him ignored. Going to security would make him a suspect. No, he had to be smart. That night, he went back. Not to clean. To confirm. He waited until 3:07 a.m., the time Taro returned the night before. Sure enough, the CTO slipped in, glanced both ways, then entered the same room. This time Luther was ready. He had pulled an old laptop from storage, one he built himself back in college, long before prison, long before the fall. It still worked. With a few tools borrowed from the IT cart, he tapped into the security camera junction just outside the conference room. Passive listening only. No signal sent out. The audio streamed in. Taro's voice crackled. Package has been buried in the diagnostics array. Delay the release by 3 weeks. They won't notice until the prototype sabotaged itself. Luther felt a chill. It was worse than he thought. Taro was sabotaging Calderon's newest innovation, an autonomous fleet control system being pitched to the Department of Defense. Billions in contracts. National security. The man was burying fail codes into the heart of the system, likely for a competitor. Or worse. Luther spent the rest of the night mapping the code he'd seen, matching it with the system diagrams he'd memorized during his routine floor sweeps. His mind flew through the connections like he had never left the lab. And when the sun rose, he had the evidence. But again, what could a janitor do? He needed someone inside the company with enough integrity to listen, and enough clearance to act. He chose Sarah Delaney. Sarah was a junior systems analyst. Quiet, disciplined. But more importantly, she had once held the door open for Luther, looked him in the eye, and said, "Good night, Mr. Grant." He hadn't forgotten. The next night, he slipped a USB drive into her desk drawer. No note, just the drive dot on it, video feed, audio clips, matching code samples, and a simple message embedded in the metadata: check your kernel logs. Look at diagnostics history from Sunday night. If I'm wrong, I'll never touch another floor here. But if I'm right, Calderon needs you. She checked, and she found it. The next 3 days were a storm. Internal review teams mobilized. Security teams scrubbed access logs. The Department of Defense postponed its site visit. Tara was placed on leave, pending investigation, but the executives were panicked. They couldn't publicly accuse one of their own without hard proof. That's when Sarah made the boldest move of her life. She told the truth. All of it. She told them the janitor had discovered it. There was laughter, disbelief, outrage, but she didn't back down. She pulled out the logs, then the camera feeds, then the duplicate sandbox she'd built using Luther's directions. She showed them the error propagation path, the corruption layers buried deep in the firmware. And then, finally, the audit log showing only one person had accessed the diagnostic array on Sunday night: Vincent Taro. Silence fell. And in that silence, one man's redemption began. The board called Luther in, not to fire him, to ask him to explain. He did. In a voice as calm and measured as if reciting floor cleaner ratios, Luther walked them through the logic structure of the firmware. He outlined how the sabotage would have triggered a fault cascade after the third field deployment. He explained why the prototype's telemetry logs would have blamed environmental conditions, making the failure look like poor manufacturing, not malicious code. When he finished, the room was quiet again. The CEO cleared his throat. "Mr. Grant, why didn't you come to us sooner?" Luther smiled faintly. "Because the last time I trusted a corporation, they destroyed my life. I had to be sure." They offered him a new position, Director of Systems Integrity. He declined. "I didn't do this for a job," he said. "I did it because someone finally saw me, and because this company still has people worth protecting." But the story didn't end there. Sarah became the youngest vice president of innovation in company history. Under her leadership, Calderon scrapped the compromised system and rebuilt it from the ground up, with Luther as an unofficial consultant. The security division, under pressure from the Department of Defense, requested a full audit of all internal access policies. They found over a dozen weaknesses in their protocol, all areas Luther had quietly cleaned without ever being noticed. Taro was indicted on corporate espionage and conspiracy to commit fraud. His name became a footnote in scandal, and Luther, he kept cleaning, not because he had to, because he chose to, because every night, as the world slept, he walked the halls as more than a shadow now. He was the quiet sentinel, the mind behind the mop, the genius who saved a billion-dollar empire with nothing more than memory, integrity, and the courage to speak up. And in every corner of Calderon Automotive Systems, people whispered his name, not in pity, but in respect.